With a couple of media clips today. There's a larger point I want to make about what's going on. There is a meltdown happening in the media over Donald Trump's executive orders, repealing his executive order or repealing Lyndon Johnson's executive order on affirmative action, repealing all of Joe Biden's executive orders for the most part, pardoning January 6th folks and alike. This is David Axelrod from CNN. Just listen to this.
He signed.
And one of the things that one of the habits of Donald Trump is he doesn't tolerate prosperity very well, his own prosperity. And I think the lesson he's drawn from the last 4 years is he can get away with anything. And I think he's sort of daring people in some ways with these pardons. It's also true that the whole thing, we talked about this last night, flows from the fundamental lie. Remember, on the day of the insurrection, he issued a video to the protesters. He said, "We love you. You're very special. I know your pain. I know you're hurt. We had an election that was stolen from us. It was a landslide election, and everyone knows it." And so this whole thing flows from the original sin that he is trying to expunge. And at this point, he said, look, I got reelected. I dodged 4 indictments. And I'm just going to put my foot to the pedal. And these people supported me. And, you know, at the end of the day, for Donald Trump, that's the litmus test. Are you good to me?
Now, I thought it was interesting. And it was Ellie Honig, who is the legal analyst for CNN, and it was David Axelrod. Maybe they had a Republican via satellite, wasn't in studio. I'm struck by the boring nature of it. You go to the Drudge Report today, and the coverage is about the Donald Trump ratings. Ratings were down. Not as many people watched this inaugural. I actually think that's a good thing. I think it's a good thing that we can have a transition of presidential power in this country and people go on about their lives. It was MLK weekend. I know a lot of people who were at Disney because they had time off from school. Few friends of mine went to the beach in Florida and hilariously wound up snowing on them. It was a holiday weekend. People were gone. People were gearing up for college football. And nobody really cared. Trump supporters were emotionally invested in it. Some of the far left partisans were emotionally invested in it, but most Americans just went about their daily lives. And I actually think that's a good thing. I think it is a good thing that Americans decided that, I'm going to go about my life. But in the news media, they had to make a very big deal about the ratings, because that's what they did in 2017 when Donald Trump came in and Sean Spicer insisted that it was the most attended inaugural event ever, and the media had to show the pictures of all the empty seats, and it was a he said, they said, tit for tat, back and forth, and most people are like, seriously, this is what we're arguing about? Pete Hegseth is on track to be Secretary of Defense. There's been a late effort to scuttle Hegseth's nomination. His former sister-in-law has come forward with an affidavit in which she claims she was told that should she come forward, her effort to come forward would scuttle the Hegseth nomination. No one wants to ask who told you this. No one seems to care that someone told her coming forward would sabotage Hegseth. The actual ex-wife, by the way, says there is no abuse. She doesn't want to talk to anyone. Please leave her alone. She says she didn't put her sister up to it. She wishes everyone would just leave her alone, and she's moved on with her life and wants everyone else to move on with their life. And yet the media, NBC News in particular, which is a bastion of far-left propaganda these days, not just MSNBC, but NBC as a whole, NBC has come out and insisted something must be done. They've run a huge report on the sister-in-law making a claim when the actual former wife says, nope, not true. And they don't care. They don't care about the truth. They care about nailing Hegseth to the wall. PBS says Elon Musk did the Hail Hitler salute. Elon Musk says, my heart goes out to you, and throws like he's throwing into the crowd, does it twice. The Anti-Defamation League came out and said, that is not a Nazi salute. We should be generous and graceful. In context, he says, my heart goes out to you, grabs his chest and flings his arm out as if he's throwing his heart to people. The neo-Nazis have come out and say, yep, he's one of us. And, of course, they'll say, oh, the neo-Nazis say he's one of them. He must be one of them. The neo-Nazis would know. They have a vested interest in saying this about Elon Musk. You would think that the media that has been all worked up into disinformation and misinformation would actually want to put things in proper context, but no, the news media would rather go with, well, they said, some say. When you go with in the media, some say, what it means is this is the editorial opinion of the press publication, but they themselves can't say it, so they got to find some nut out there to agree with them. And then there's the outrage over the executive orders. Instead of interviewing the Americans who have been murdered by illegal aliens, they're interviewing the illegal aliens. And oh, poor illegal aliens, surely someone will come to save you. It's iterative. It's boring. It's the same old thing. There's nothing new here. They've gone back to the playbook from 2016 to 2020. And I think the reason they did is they're like, well, we beat him before with this. We can beat him again, except you can't beat him again. He can't run for office again. And all he's got to do, he no longer has to obsess about the press coverage. He's got 2 years with a Republican majority in Congress to do whatever he wants to do. Only the courts can stop him. And I think they might. One of his executive orders rewrites what it means to be a citizen. I don't think the president of the United States can have that power. I don't think he does. And I think that everyone who is outraged over Joe Biden's overreach and executive order should be concerned that the president of the United States thinks he has it within his power under the Constitution to redefine citizenship. Every single one of you, if you're committed to the Constitution, should be upset that he thinks he can do this and hope a court will step in. That's for Congress to do, not the president. Separation of powers still matters. But that's not the angle the press has chosen to take. The press has chosen to take outrage. Outrage. Again. Now, listen, I understand. You're listening to me right now. You're thinking, Erickson, we know this. Erickson, why are you? Because this is my point. It's boring. We know what they're doing. They have been discredited. And that, I think, is the greatest point. They spent 4 years covering for Joe Biden, serving as apologists for Joe Biden. You know, when someone uses the word apologist, they're not coming out and apologizing for someone's behavior. They're coming out and defending that person's behavior. They're making excuses for that person's behavior. An apologist of a faith is someone who defends the faith. An apologist of a politician is someone who comes out and defends the politician, legitimizes the politician. And that's what the press has done. For 4 years, they gave Joe Biden passes they would give no other president if they had an R next to their name, including Donald Trump. And the American public now knows this. The American public now sees this. The American public now recognizes they've been played by the press for 4 years. By the way, it is people at CNN have done this. Jim Acosta is a great example. It is all of MSNBC. I'm friends with Joe Scarborough. I like Joe Scarborough. But I got to point out, it's Joe Scarborough who said the what? F you if you can't handle it. That's how he started it. This is the smartest, best, brightest Joe Biden there's ever been. I know him. I've seen him. And then we saw the CNN debate. We're like, Joe, really? Was it worth it to say that to the national audience? Poor guy can't win for trying. He does that to defend Joe Biden. It blows up in his face. And then he and me could go down to Mar-a-Lago just to have a conversation with the incoming president of the United States. They're news people, for God's sakes. They want to have some sort of communication with the president, and the left goes absolutely bat crap crazy on them. My plea here for the members of the press who I know are listening to me right now, find a new angle on Donald Trump. Maybe actually cover this from the overwhelming number of Americans who voted for him. He won the popular vote. he's clearly onto something. And what you're doing is you're taking everything Donald Trump is doing that the people said they wanted, and you're trying to portray it as bad. And if you're trying to portray as bad the things the majority of people who voted said they want, someone out there, I should say plurality, because it wasn't technically 51% of the popular vote, but you know what I mean. He got the plurality of the popular vote. He won it. He won it because people are tired of illegal immigration. So maybe, just maybe, members of the press, instead of being outraged and covering the poor illegal immigrant who's going to get deported, maybe cover the American who's the victim of their crime. Maybe instead of lamenting the end of DEI, why don't you actually go interview the middle-class white people who can't find jobs in America because the national government has decided that because of the color of their skin, they are not allowed to have a job even though they may be more qualified. Nope, you can't do that. God forbid you tell the truth on that. Maybe talk to the Asian student who was denied access to a college for someone with inferior test scores being penalized for being a successful student. Maybe why don't you just go out and talk to the people in the United States who have been victims of the prior administration, which you never did. Go talk to the people of Western North Carolina. Ask them what they think of FEMA up in the mountains from when Joe Biden was president. You won't do that. But now you want to go in and do exactly what you did in 2016 to 2020, which is to cover Donald Trump, where any action he takes, you got to go find the victim of that action. You've not changed. You've done nothing different. Congress is a bunch of clowns and idiots. There's occasional gems in Congress, but most of them are just egotistical idiots. And they have higher approval ratings than the National Press Corps. Just think about that for a minute. Congress, people, Congress is more trusted than the news media in the United States. And you would think the news media would wonder why. But they don't wonder why. They're just doing iterative, boring coverage of Donald Trump. Why? Because they know no better. They learn nothing. They forgot nothing. And because of it, they'll soon enough be on the ash heap of history. You who I guess we in the South would call you Yankees, those of you up north who are listening, will you please come get your weather? It left white stuff all over our lawns and our driveways last night. 18-wheelers have careened off the road in middle Georgia. Interstates are shut down. They tried brining. In fact, they got ahead of the storm yesterday as it came in, but it lasted and lingered longer than they expected, and now they're having to retreat roads. It is very hazardous south of Atlanta. It's very odd. Normally, you know, I had on the governor of Georgia yesterday talking about this, that normally these storms come from the north to the south. They hit about middle Georgia, and nope. Here, Grand Isle, Louisiana, has 1.5 feet of snow on the beaches, snow drift. Just absolutely crazy to think. So Grand Isle, Louisiana, when I was a kid, that's where we used to go to the beach. It's a very muddy water, brown water beach. I used to be so scared when I was a kid because you would see porpoises popping up out off the beach. Like sharks. You see the fins coming out of the water. Sharks. Nope. Just dolphins, porpoises. Lafayette, Louisiana, my buddy Joe Cunningham there, the program director at KRF, has his nerdy weather station. He is such a nerd. He's got his weather station, their weather gauge and all, and massive, blizzard conditions in South Louisiana. Baton Rouge, Louisiana got 8 inches of snow. New Orleans, Louisiana got 1 foot of snow. Dothan, Alabama had about 8.5 inches of snow, record snow in Dothan, Alabama by the time it was all over. And then the further north you went, the less snow there was, which is just wild. I am in Macon, Georgia, the geographic center of the state of Georgia, and I'm snowed in. I cannot get out of my driveway. It is covered in snow, and underneath the snow is ice. And right now it has gotten above 32 degrees, and the sun is beating down, and there are parts of the snow that are melting. And in about 4 hours, it's going to be back below 32 degrees, and there's going to be nothing but ice. We're stuck. My son last night, it got to 18 degrees. I want those of you at the Georgia Spa Company to know my son hopped in the hot tub last night when it got that low. Now, I got to tell you about Swiss America because they're warning people about the economic turmoil that is happening right now out there. And they want to warn you and advise you about the secret war on cash that is happening, where the government is trying to track your spending. And even if you use crypto, it is not really as anonymous as you think. You need to get their secret war on cash report. They're rated A+ by the Better Business Bureau. They've been the trusted leader in precious metals for 40 years in this country. They want to help you with your retirement and finances. The report takes less than 15 minutes to read. All you have to do is call them at 800-289-2646. If you don't want to talk to a human being, all you have to do is text my name, Erick, E-R-I-C-K, to 800-289-2646, 800-289-2646. The report's completely free, very eye-opening as well. Just mention Erick, E-R-I-C-K, when you call or text 800-289-2646. They'll send you the report. Message and data rates may apply. Greetings, conversationalists. It's Erick Erickson here. The phone number is 877-973-7425 if you want to be on the program. I want to start with two things I disagree with Donald Trump on, because I got a lot that I agree with him on. Let me get these two out of the way. Getting rid of federal government protection for John Bolton. Now, listen, I understand that if you like Donald Trump, you don't like John Bolton. You used to, but now you don't. John Bolton is wanted dead by the nation of Iran, because John Bolton was the mastermind behind Donald Trump's plan to kill Qasem Soleimani. Because of the assassination of Soleimani, Iran has put out a hit on John Bolton, and so the federal government has protected John Bolton because in the service of the United States, because of actions he did in service of the United States, a foreign government wants him killed. So the government gave him protection. Donald Trump has deprived John Bolton of that protection, not because he doesn't deserve it, but because he doesn't like Donald Trump. That is a precedent that will come back to bite Trump supporters when foreign governments decide they want them dead, and the incoming Democratic president in the future says, well, they can pay for it themselves. I don't care that their actions that the government wants them dead came in service to the United States. I don't like them, therefore screw them. They can die. That's what this amounts to, and I think that's wrong. Whether I like a Democrat in the Biden administration or not, whether I like a Republican in a Republican administration or not, should have no bearing on the fact that they, in service to the United States, took actions that cause a foreign government to want them murdered. Our government should have an obligation to protect the people. Otherwise, what's going to happen is you're going to get people in government who restrain themselves from doing things in the interest of this country, thinking, well, if I get out of here, some government may want me killed, and the government's not guaranteed to protect me. You're setting a very dangerous precedent. The other one is Ross Ulbricht of the dark web website that he built a website that allowed people to engage in human trafficking and drug trades, and he is a libertarian crypto bro, and the libertarian crypto bros love the guy, but this is a man who built a website knowingly designed to allow people to engage in activities that descended into lawlessness, human trafficking, drug trade, drug trafficking, and other things. And there were lots of evidence in his trial that he knowingly allowed this to happen, and he went to jail. The crypto libertarian bros wanted him out of jail. Donald Trump got him out of jail. He's been pardoned. I don't think he should. It's a minor thing. But it is also Donald Trump keeping a promise, and that I appreciate. He made a promise to the libertarian crypto bros, and he has kept his promise, so good for him keeping a promise. I just don't think it's one he should have made. That being said, I'm hard-pressed. I mean, I've got criticisms of some of the people who were part of it. It turns out that Trump decided just to rip the Band-Aid off. Instead of doing a piecemeal approach to the January 6th pardons, he said, F it. Those are his words, literally, except he didn't say F. He said the word and pardon them all. I don't blame him. He wanted to do it on day one. And guess what? By tomorrow, everyone will have moved on. And Trump appreciates this. He has a way of controlling the news cycle. He can do things that get people moving on. And guess where the media has landed now? The next outrage. Donald Trump has signed a series of executive orders abolishing DEI and affirmative action in the federal government. In the 1960s, President Lyndon Baines Johnson issued executive orders requiring that the federal government use affirmative action and deploy affirmative action. Now, the way the media talks about affirmative action and DEI, it is elevating in a society that is majority white and controlled by white people. It's elevating other voices. But this is the thing you have to understand about how the media and progressives use DEI and affirmative action. Skin color must be diverse so long as viewpoints are not. And that's something that the American media, the academy, Democrats, progressive governments, that they don't want to acknowledge, but is true. They wish to elevate black people and Hispanic people and Asian people so long as the black, Hispanic, and Asian people have left-wing viewpoints. They don't want diversity of view. I mean, this is one of the problems on college campuses today. They're all about skin color and sexual diversity, but God forbid anyone come in who's a conservative. They don't want viewpoint diversity. They want a monolith of viewpoints. They want a hive mind, a bubble. And Donald Trump is signing orders, getting rid of DEI. In fact, Donald Trump is laying off whole divisions of DEI appointees within the government. He is rescinding Lyndon Johnson's executive orders on affirmative action, which kind of baffles me. That was still on the books, among other things. This is Jason Riley at the Wall Street Journal. In his inaugural address 4 years ago, Joe Biden prattled on about systemic racism and white supremacy and a cry for racial justice. Meeting these challenges, he said, requires more than words. It requires that most elusive of things in a democracy, unity. A short time later, Mr. Biden issued an executive order on the importance of racial equity and support for underserved communities throughout the federal government. Racial equity used to mean equal treatment regardless of race, but it's become a progressive euphemism for group preferences. In practice, it means discriminating to achieve racial balance. Mr. Biden, invoking George Floyd's death in 2020, said that, quote, this nation and this government need to change their whole approach to the issue of racial equity and make it not just an issue for any one department of government. It has to be the business of the whole of government. For the past 4 years, that's exactly what transpired. Federal agencies were directed to implement or increase the availability of diversity, equity, and inclusion programs surrounding race as well as gender identity. Chief diversity officers established agency equity teams and submitted annual DEI progress reports. The Federal Office of Personnel Management warned that the intentional use of an incorrect name or pronoun or both could, in certain circumstances, contribute to an unjust, unlawful, hostile work environment. Upon assuming office Monday, Mr. Trump announced that he would put a stop to these efforts, which he believes have been detrimental to national unity. He thanked minority voters for the tremendous outpouring of love and trust that you have shown me with your vote and said that I will not forget it. Yet he also vowed to pursue race and gender-neutral policies in his second term. I will also end the government policy of trying to socially engineer race and gender into every aspect of public and private life, the president said. We will forge a society that is colorblind and merit-based, and as of today, it will henceforth be the official policy of the United States that there are only two genders, male and female. Later in the day, Mr. Trump signed an executive order that effectively reversed the Biden administration's DEI directives. It calls for the termination of all discriminatory programs, including illegal DEI and diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility mandates, policies, programs, preferences, and activities in the federal government under whatever name they appear. Many progressive activists and media elites are no doubt horrified, but for everyday Americans, it's common sense. This is Jason Riley, The Wall Street Journal. If you text DATA to 33777, it's in the show notes. You can get the link. DEI is discrimination. So the New York Times is one of the biggest purveyors of the mythology in this country about race. The New York Times and Nicole Hannah, whatever her name is, or Hannah Nicole, whatever. She's irrelevant these days. She started the 1619 Project, and it argued that the United States was founded on the protection of slavery. It was a rewriting of American history. In fact, she finally had to acknowledge it was storytelling because a large number of historians on the left, not just the right, came out and said she was full of crap, said it wasn't true. It was called the 1619 Project because in 1619, the first slave arrived on the North American continent. And the argument put forward by the left was that this nation was founded not on the inalienable human rights of, or inalienable rights of life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness, but on protection of slavery. They had to ignore some very inconvenient facts. Like, for example, in this country, in the colonies, American colonies in New England were banning and prohibiting slavery in their colonies before Great Britain did. They have to ignore the writings of Thomas Jefferson and the founding fathers who acknowledged before the Revolutionary War that slavery had to go away because it was unjust, but they decided to kick the can down the road because they needed to preserve unity of the colonies to fight Great Britain and would fight the issue of slavery after the founding of the country. And then they kept kicking the can down the road, and it led to the Civil War where Americans shed their blood to make men free. If you heard the inaugural, I intentionally played it on air. They were singing before Donald Trump was sworn in the battle hymn of the Republic. Now, it has changed over the years, and I was encouraged that the Navy band sang it. Maybe it was the Marine Corps band, actually. They sang it the way it was originally written. There's a reference to Christ. As he died to make men holy, let us die to make men free. It was changed over time as he died to make men holier, let us live to make men free. But the original wording was as he died to make men holy, let us die to make men free. His truth is marching on. Glory, glory, hallelujah. And it was a reference in the Civil War to the Union soldiers dying on battlefields to make men free. And that's the inconvenient truth for the reparations argument. It's the inconvenient truth for 1619. It's the inconvenient truth for DEI. White Union soldiers died on the battlefield so that black men and women were free in this country. The reparations were paid in blood on a battlefield. It doesn't mean things have been perfect. It doesn't mean that at all. In fact, time heals all wounds, and it's taken a lot of time to heal all wounds, and we still have time from which the wounds must be healed, and yet we're headed in the right direction. And when the government comes along under Democrats and decide to impose DEI on the nation, what they're essentially doing is saying, you know what, we have to discriminate. We have to discriminate. Donald Trump's DEI executive actions are on the money. He's firing divisions within the federal government. You know, he can't fire under civil service rules. He can't fire individuals in the civil service, but he can shut down whole divisions within the civil service, and he is. Any entity within the civil service related to DEI is now gone. Any meeting related to the implementation of DEI within the federal government as of this morning is canceled. Any advisory committee on DEI as of this morning is disbanded. He shut it all down. What progressives were doing was within the government implementing tools to advance racism in America. It just happened to be racism against white people, so the left loved it. But it was still racism. It was still discrimination, and they couldn't be honest with it. They can't be honest about it. They can't be honest. I mean, like illegal immigration. Democrats cannot be honest that they want a slave class of people in this country to take care of their grandparents and mow their lawns. They can't do it. So they just redefine words and they come up with new phrases. They can't be honest that they wanted racism and discrimination in the federal government. They just wanted it against white people. And Donald Trump has said no more. No more. You got to shut it down. And so he is. And it's a good thing. And we'll all be better off because of it. And you know what the media is going to do? They're going to whine. Let them. I think someone who actually is a friend of Elon Musk's needs to do an intervention because I think he's becoming Icarus. Remember the myth of Icarus? Daedalus' father, they needed to escape. They made wings of wax and feather, and they were able to escape a prison, a tower. But Icarus, so enamored by the wings, flew higher and higher, and Daedalus said, Icarus, come down, Icarus, come down. And Icarus flew so high and so close to the sun, the wax began to melt, the feathers began to drop off, and he plummeted to the earth and died. I'm afraid that's what's going to happen to Elon Musk at this moment. Vivek Ramaswamy has already been pushed out of Doge. The cover is he's going to run for governor of Ohio. The behind-the-scenes story is he was getting too annoying and too much of a distraction for people, and Elon Musk is headed that way if he's not careful. He needs to be very careful in just how overexposed he is. Donald Trump doesn't like people to be more exposed than him, and he's headed that way. He needs to be careful. If he wants to have a real impact, he needs to stay behind the scenes and not in the spotlight. One of his friends needs to have an intervention with him, I'm afraid. Hello, Americans, welcome. It is Erickson here across the United States from snowy middle Georgia, using my home studio today. Haven't used it in a couple of years. The phone number, 877-973-7425. If you'd like to be on the program, if you text the word Erick, E-R-I-C-K, to 33777, you can get the show notes, the live stream, the podcast, and so much more. I want to actually, if I can do a little bit of education with you in this half hour and actually explain something to you, because it's going to be really helpful if you understand this, because it's going to become a central fight in American political spheres over the next couple of years, beginning really with an executive order Donald Trump has now signed. I want to state out of the gate, I'll give you my opinion on the matter, but I first want to bring you up to speed. I'll tell you when I'm telling you what I think. Don't be angry with me for telling you what's actually the law right now. All I'm doing is educating you on what is reality right now, whether you or I like it. When the Congress, after the Civil War, began passing the amendments after the Civil War, the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments, banning slavery, giving explicitly the voting right and citizenship to black men, and they passed the 14th Amendment. Section 1 of the 14th Amendment says this: all persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States and of the state wherein they reside. No state shall make or enforce any law which shall abridge the privileges or immunities of citizens of the United States, nor shall any state deprive any person of life, liberty, or property without due process of law, nor deny to any person within its jurisdiction the equal protection of the laws. The United States Supreme Court, beginning in the early 1900s, used that language, no state shall deny any person within its jurisdiction the equal protection of the law and the due process of the law. They used that as an excuse to do what they called the incorporation of the Bill of Rights. What the Supreme Court did is a very piecemeal approach to taking the Bill of Rights and applying it to the individual states. Now, I need to, this is going to blow your mind to some degree, but prior to the 1900s, and really it took off during the World War II and Depression era with FDR, prior to then, the Bill of Rights did not apply to the states. It only applied to the federal government. So if you were in the state of Maryland, for example, it was a Catholic state and had ties to the Catholic Church. If you were in Georgia, Georgia had ties, as did many southern states, to the Baptist Church. If you were in New England, there were ties to Presbyterian denominations. And some had ties to Anglican denominations, and states could have state religions. and specific ties to specific churches and work with churches or not. The freedom of speech and freedom of press laws did not apply to state governments. So state governments could control people's speech. They could control the press. Now, many states wound up adopting equivalents to the Bill of Rights, but they were actually not bound by the Bill of Rights. Trial by jury, freedoms of speech and press and assembly and petition of government, the right to privacy, the right to be compensated if the government takes your property, all those things that applied to the federal government did not apply to the states. And what the Supreme Court did in the 1900s, based on the Section 1 of the 14th Amendment, is began applying the Bill of Rights to the states through a process called incorporation. The last of the Bill of Rights to be applied to the states was Article 2, the Heller case before the Supreme Court in, I think, 2014. Essentially said, listen, if every other one of the Bill of Rights is a fundamental right, then so is the Second Amendment. And we must apply the Second Amendment to the states as well. It was a very long time before the Second Amendment was incorporated against the states. And that incorporation is, again, applying the Bill of Rights to the states and binding the states to the Bill of Rights. In the debate on the 14th Amendment, the Congressional Record notes from one of its authors a concern about individuals who are in this country and not supposed to be in the country getting citizenship. And the authors of the 14th Amendment at the time, arguing in the Congressional Record, says, no, that should not be anyone's concern. Under the reading of the 14th Amendment as the drafters drafted it, people who are not in this country without the permission of this country would not be citizens of this country. And along came a man named Wong Kim Ark. Let me give you the fact pattern from Wong Kim Ark, and I am having to refer to a degree to Wikipedia. I studied the case in law school, and I'm going to get to the actual text of the case, but Wikipedia actually does a pretty good job of summarizing it. Wong Kim Ark was born in San Francisco in 1873. A lot of the Western railroads had been built by Asian immigrants, particularly from China. So many Chinese immigrants came into the country. There was a backlash, just as there has been a backlash to Irish immigrants and a backlash to Eastern European immigrants. There was a backlash at the time to Chinese immigrants. And Chester Arthur, in May of 1882, signed the Chinese Exclusion Act, prohibiting the immigration of Chinese laborers for 10 years, making exceptions for merchants, teachers, students, travelers, and diplomats. The Chinese Exclusion Act was the first major American law implemented to prevent members of a national group from immigrating to the United States. There was growing concern. By the way, that law remained in force until 1943. In the fallout was the birth of Wong Kim Ark. Wong Kim Ark was born in San Francisco. His parents had immigrated to the United States. His parents were not citizens of the United States, but legal residents of the United States. They were allowed to be here and subject to the jurisdiction of the United States because they had been given legal resident status within the United States. Wong Kim Ark, though, born in this country to legal resident aliens, he was not born to citizens. The law at the time said that Wong Kim Ark couldn't be a citizen of the United States. Wong Kim Ark, born to legal residents but not citizens, left to go to China. And he returned and was prohibited from entering the United States and argued he was an American citizen. You couldn't block him from coming in. And he sued to get access to the country. And the Supreme Court ruled that, quote, a child born in the United States of parents of Chinese descent who at the time of his birth are subjects to the Emperor of China but have a permanent domicile and residence in the United States and are there carrying on business and are not employed in any diplomatic or official capacity under the Emperor of China become American citizens. In other words, his parents were of Chinese descent. They had permanent domicile and residence in the United States, even though they were not citizens of the United States. They were allowed permanent resident alien status. They were not carrying on the business of the Emperor of China. Therefore, their son can stay. This case has become the case that says that if you are born on American soil, you become an American citizen automatically. That's what essentially this case has descended to. Now, if you read the Wong Kim Ark case, it's not a hard case to understand. It is written in the 1800s. 1898 is when the case came out. But what you will note is that the Supreme Court relies on a great deal of European law at the time. In fact, let me just read you this. At the time of the adoption of the Constitution of the United States in 1789 and long before, it would seem to have been the rule in Europe generally, as it certainly was in France, that as said by Poitiers, citizens, true and native-born citizens, are those who are born within the extent of the domain of France, and mere birth within the realm gives the right of a native-born citizen, independently of the origin of the father or the mother or of their domicile, and children born in a foreign country of a French father who has not established his domicile there, nor given up the intention of returning, were also deemed Frenchmen. As Laurent says, by a favor, a sort of fiction, and Calvo, by a sort of fiction of extraterritoriality, considered as born in France and therefore invested with the French nationality. The general principle of citizenship by birth within French territory prevailed until after the French Revolution and was preserved within successive constitutions. But not just that, the same held true within the British Empire, from which the United States derived, that children born within the British Empire were considered subjects of Britain, even if their parents were not themselves subject to the King of England. The child would be recognized as part of the realm. And so what the justices of the Supreme Court said is, given the patterns at the time of the founding of the United States, it must be presumed that a child born on American soil is an American. Legal scholars to this day overwhelmingly agree that a child of illegal aliens in the United States must be a citizen of the United States. And I got to tell you, I'm not so sure that's the right reading. See, it comes down to the specific language in the 14th Amendment. All persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States. See, I understand where people derive this from Wong Kim Ark, but this is now my opinion. So the analysis is that under Wong Kim Ark, it has been pretty settled law in the United States, unless Congress changes it, and Congress can change it, that an illegal alien in this country who gives birth, their child becomes a citizen even though the parent does not. I'm actually not sure that's the right reading of it. The case involved in Wong Kim Ark involved citizens or non-citizens of the United States, but who had been granted permanent residence in the United States. So in other words, they were subject to the jurisdiction thereof. I'm not sure an illegal alien who comes into this country actually meets the same fact pattern. And I think the Supreme Court, if it revisits it, I think the people who are absolutely certain they would uphold it, they might not need to be as certain as they are. Because I can actually see, based on the reading, and by the way, based on the intent and interpretation of those who wrote the 14th Amendment, that those who came illegally into this country had no claim to be a part of this country, even though they could be prosecuted in this country. I'm just not so sure. And I actually think that illegal aliens who come to this country and give birth, that we probably shouldn't treat their children as citizens of the United States as a discouragement to illegal immigration. I think if someone comes into this country legally for any reason and gives birth, their children should be citizens of the United States. You come here on a tourist visa and give birth, I think your child's a citizen. I think if you willfully break the laws of the United States to come into this country, we should not incentivize that by giving your child citizenship. Here's what I know, though. Here's what I know for sure. Congress at any time could clarify this, and Congress since 1898 and the Wong Kim Ark decision has refused to clarify it. What I know to be true with every fiber in my being is that the President of the United States, by executive order, cannot change this. And so Donald Trump is going to be sued for his executive order ending birthright citizenship. And he should, and he will lose. Because the President of the United States has no power to change this. I think, however, there's a case to be made to take it back to the Supreme Court and say, you, the Supreme Court, got it wrong. And if the president can stick with a lawsuit against him, he's going to lose in a district court. He's probably going to lose in a court of appeals. But if he can get it all the way to the Supreme Court, he may be able to get the Supreme Court to reconsider and say, actually, Wong Kim Ark's fact pattern does not apply to illegal aliens. His parents, Wong Kim Ark's parents, were lawful residents of the United States at the time, unlike illegal aliens. And all those people who are legally certain that illegal aliens who give birth in this country, their kids are citizens, they may be on the short end of the stick. And I actually think the court should revisit that nuance of Wong Kim Ark, because that case, the fact pattern, was not about illegal aliens giving birth in this country, but legal resident aliens. So there's a way forward for the president, but Congress itself should be the one to act. Something happened in Washington, D.C. last night that has not happened in 4 years. A Marine was stationed at the front door of the West Wing until after 10 o'clock last night. That means the President of the United States was still in the Oval Office. We haven't seen that the entirety of the Biden administration. Donald Trump working late. Donald Trump, now 48 hours in, has spent more time with the press answering questions than Joe Biden did in 4 years as President of the United States. And the media is unhappy about it. They're just angry. They don't like him. They're argumentative. I thought it was interesting. The new boss at CNN instructed his anchors on the inauguration to let go of the past and just give Trump time to establish himself now, which was a good thing. They need to keep that up. In Wong Kim Ark, the Supreme Court was dealing with the son of Chinese immigrant parents who were not American citizens but had legal permanent residence in the United States. I think that if you take a case of illegal aliens giving birth to the Supreme Court, it is very plausible that the Supreme Court will say these are not the same thing. Wong Kim Ark's parents had legal residence in the United States and were subject, therefore, to the laws of the United States. They were no longer bound by the laws of the Emperor of China. Therefore, Wong Kim Ark could be considered born an American citizen. But an illegal alien who comes into this country still maintains their passport and residency in another country, and their giving birth in this country precludes their child from being an American citizen. And just because we've misinterpreted Wong Kim Ark all these years, I think there's no sure thing. Now, yeah, I acknowledge the odds are likely the Supreme Court does say a birthright citizenship applies even to illegal aliens. I acknowledge that that is the more likely outcome based on past precedent, but I don't think it's a guarantee. And the main reason I think that is, one, Wong Kim Ark applied to legal alien residents of the United States, and number two, the author of Section 1 of the 14th Amendment made very clear in his statements that at that time, when it was passed, no one doubted the 14th Amendment would not apply to aliens inside the United States. And people forget that when passed by Congress in the debate, that was the recognition of members of Congress of both parties that an alien inside the United States, if they gave birth, their child would not be an American citizen. Barack Obama left office. And actually, I think before he left office, some of his younger guys went out. They had celebrity status. This happens a lot. You leave a Democratic administration and you get some level of celebrity status, not just with the left, but with the media as well. And several of the Obama young men left and started a podcast called Pod Saves America. And during the Trump administration, it exploded in popularity, and the young men have become very, very wealthy off a podcast and ancillary opportunities. And they were on Morning Joe, these guys. There's Obama's speechwriter and a couple others from the Obama administration, all young men, now grown up. And, well, they want to talk to Democrats about how you restore trust with the American public. Something that they're very interested in is how Democrats lost the ability to talk to the American people. And I'm not sure a group of progressive guys who live now in Los Angeles and have gotten very wealthy are the best people. But, you know, that they were on MSNBC talking to people on MSNBC. I just want to play you some of this. This is from Jon Favreau, not the Hollywood director, but the former Obama speechwriter.
And then they think what's going to happen is they're going to go on Joe Rogan, and then Joe Rogan's going to say something about trans issues, and they're going to say, trans issues, that's just a distraction from high prices. And have you heard about what we did with Medicare? And Joe Rogan's going to be like, what? Because like they talk like a message document, and they talk like their pollster told them to talk. And instead you actually just have to have a conversation like you're having a conversation in real life. And right now there's like a handful of Democrats who can do that.
Right.
Yeah, it's you know, you see it's not what they're saying, it's how they're saying it. This is John Lovett.
So one of the challenges that you guys have, that shows like ours have, is trying to break through the noise and not just the distraction of the day, but also the misinformation and disinformation, the fact that it's so hard to get clear information to people who need to make decisions. What's the recipe there? How do you try that?
Yeah, what's the answer to misinformation? It's a big question. I do think one aspect of it, though, is I think a lot of Democrats, especially hyper-engaged Democrats, it feels like for years we've watched Donald Trump say to millions of people, you're not wrong to care about this. Whatever that issue may be, the border, DEI, whatever issue he's using to inflame people. But he's feeding on people's anxieties, their fears, their bigotries, whatever it may be. And he's saying, you're not wrong to care about that. And Democrats have spent years saying, you're wrong not to care about this. You're wrong not to be bothered by these assaults on our democracy. You're wrong not to care about this stuff. And I think if at a time when there's so much noise, we have to go to people and talk about what they already care about, or what we can't beg people to care about the things that a small group of Democrats already cared about to begin with.
One more, Tommy Vietor.
We need to talk more about money in politics and the way that's distorting our democracy. I think that's one way we could ground this message about democracy that can feel a little esoteric and divorced from the day-to-day challenges people feel, as we talk about, hey, look on the dais of the Trump inauguration. Do you know how many billions of dollars are seated there? Do you know why Miriam Adelson is there? Because she's a big donor who bought her way onto the stage, and now she is going to dictate foreign policy in the West Bank in relations between Israel and the Palestinians.
Notice that last one, a very anti-Semitic. Oh, this Jew bought her way on stage so she can control foreign policy in the West Bank. Most Americans agree with Miriam Adelson. And this is how out of touch these guys are in their bubble. This is how out of touch they are. Listen, one more from Tommy Vietor. Listen to this.
What is it, and that's going to be what you guys talk about, what is it that breaks through all of this, you know what, that is happening, where and to that voter that I told you guys about, who likes Trump, but is going to probably not benefit at all from his policies?
I think the hardest part of getting to that voter is not what we say, but reaching that voter. Yeah. And I think part of it is volume. If you look at Donald Trump's inaugural day, he did 3 inauguration speeches. The real one, the overflow, the rally at night, then a press conference, right? It
was a reality show.
Yeah. And when you are playing a volume game, you need rep after rep after rep to make sure it gets clipped on TikTok. Yeah. And it gets shared on X. And the algorithms are killing us right now. Like Elon Musk is skewing everything towards the Republican Party. So we need to try even harder.
Joe.
You got that? It's the algorithm's fault. So this is we need people who can actually go on Joe Rogan, and we need people who can listen to people, and we need people who can tell them that the algorithm is against us, and the Jews buy their way on stage. The problem here with Democrats is every time Democrats lose, they don't think it's their issues. They think it's just the way they talked about them. They don't think there's anything wrong with boys and girls sports. They just think they have to message it differently. They don't think there's anything wrong with higher grocery prices. They just need to message it differently. If only they can tell you that actually grocery prices being high is good for you. This is the problem for the Democrats right now. Now, I'm going to be very blunt with you, and some of you aren't going to like this. The Republicans are probably going to lose in 2026 in the midterms because that typically is what happens. The voters who swung towards Donald Trump will not show up at the polls, and the people most angry at Donald Trump will. And they will swing back to the Democrats. In fact, I'm already seeing young pro-Trump people on Twitter saying, all those people who tell us we got to get offline and touch grass, baloney, what happens online is real life. No, it is not. And I don't think it's a coincidence that it's very young people online believing that their online world is what most people care about. Donald Trump won because of the economy and the border. If he can fix the economy and the border, he has license to do a whole lot more. If he doesn't fix those things, and by the way, I think tariffs will wind up making matters worse, Donald Trump and the GOP are going to be blown up by the voters in 2026. It's standard practice for midterms. And Democrats, of course, won't have to fix their messaging. And so the cycle will repeat itself. The Democrats will decide it's an affirmation of their message, as opposed to, people don't like either side in Washington, D.C. right now. They just want someone to fix things. But the Democrats, I think, are actually more out to lunch than the Republicans on this because voters did fundamentally reject their cultural values, the left's cultural values. Voters rejected that. And Democrats thinking they just need to talk about things differently without doing anything differently is fundamentally going to alienate them further and further from the American public. I don't necessarily know that a bunch of progressive bros from Hollywood are who need to be advising the Democrats when their message is, well, the algorithm works against us and the Jews are buying their way on stage. That's just going to make matters worse for them. I tweeted that the most surprising thing of my day was finding out that the Episcopalian bishop who lectured Donald Trump was married to a member of the opposite sex, which is not a very Episcopalian thing these days. I was actually rather shocked to find out that the female Episcopalian bishop was married to a dude. Well, I've been corrected now. Turns out for a very long time, she was actually in a throuple with her husband and her lesbian lover, which is very, very on brand for Episcopalians. I find it so notable how so many people in the media, Hollywood celebrities and elsewhere, are cheering on this bishop's words. But you would note that whenever a Bible-believing Christian who believes in biblical orthodoxy stands up and says anything to the left, they don't want to talk about it. But you get a Episcopalian bishop who's lived in a throuple to lecture Donald Trump on the care of the transgender community and illegal aliens, and they're all about it. And the media elevates it. The press amplifies it. It's not a coincidence that The View had this person on The View today to talk about this unifying message that she delivered to Donald Trump. And now, Donald Trump is attacking her, so she must be right. It's just wild to watch the American media. They elevate the voices that they agree with. They downplay the voices they disagree with, and they would be perfectly fine to replace Christianity with what the Episcopalian Church has replaced it with, which is a very worldly thing. The fact that the bishop can go on national television and be celebrated as a hero suggests she's of the world and not of Christ. That has no comment on Donald Trump. I have made my views on him and his behaviors and morality very well known. I just find it very, very interesting that the people who will cheer on this bishop would be absolutely silent or condemnatory if the bishop had lectured Democrats on abortion or embrace of transgenderism or gay marriage. God forbid we have a bishop stand up and lecture elected officials on those things. They would probably be condemning that person, even though they would be within biblical orthodoxy more so than this person. It's just another reminder that the things of the world hate the things of God. And now if you're listening to me say this and you think I am affirming Donald Trump's views and behaviors, that's on you, not me, because I haven't done that. I've been focused on the bishop, not Donald Trump. If you're a regular listener of this program, you know I'm regularly heaped invective by Donald Trump supporters for my criticisms of him and his behaviors. But you never want to talk about the behaviors of these people on the left who will preach Jesus' name for things that are contrary to biblical orthodoxy. You who embrace the world have an easy time in this world. And I want you to understand the reason that you can elevate these people into celebrity status and you yourself can affirm them and agree with them and have a comfortable life is because it's an act of mercy. Because the God of all creation knows something that you will soon find out, which is that this is the very best world you're going to ever have. And from death down, it doesn't end well for those who embrace the worldliness that the Episcopalian Church now preaches in substitution for real biblical orthodoxy. They are now a pagan denomination, and there's no reason that that service should have ever been held there. Find some church that actually believes the Bible and believes in the real Jesus. This is happening, you know, the World Economic Summit or Forum or whatever, where all the left-wing billionaires go. It's funny to hear all these people upset about Elon Musk and Mark Zuckerberg when so most of the world's wealthy are progressive. Most of the American wealthy are progressive, and they fund the Democratic Party. And they believe that the virtue of the billionaires who give them money, they just despise the handful of whom happen to be conservative or happen to be on the right. Not necessarily conservative, but supporting Donald Trump. They vilify them, and they scream loudly about them to distract from the George Soroses of the world, the Tim Gills of the world, and so many of the other progressive billionaires out there and multimillionaires as well. In fact, I saw a headline. Hang on a second. I gotta find you this headline if I can. I think I tweeted this earlier. Someone had done it. I think I retweeted. Let me find this because I saw this headline. And at first I thought it was like the Babylon Bee or something, and it wasn't. It's like some group of multimillionaires have come together to raise awareness about the threat of billionaires. Yeah, you think I'm making that up. Nope, here it is. Here it is. Slow to load, but it is a group of multimillionaires. Influence of super rich on Donald Trump threatens democracy, say a class of multimillionaires. So, yeah. Yep, here we go. Yes, this is it. Sorry, it was slow to load. Twitter is being slow today. Influence of super rich on Donald Trump threatens democracy, say patriotic millionaires. It's a pro-tax group telling world leaders that wealth extremism is damaging trust in the media and influencing legal systems. You got that? Because they're on the side of the left, they're patriotic. Because they have left-wing progressive values, they're patriots. These people, good grief. There are bigger threats than the millionaires and the billionaires. But Davos is happening where many of them are. And the European Union foreign policy chief has been speaking there. And I need to play you this quote. It's very important you hear this.
Alternatives, hoping that it would choose cooperation and economic prosperity for its people over fraudulent imperialistic ambitions. But instead, Russia's defense industry is churning out tanks, glide bombs, artillery shells in vast quantities. Together, EU member states' economies are 17 times bigger than that of Russia's economy. We must force his hand to show him that he will lose, and stop him before he attacks one of our own. Europe's failure to invest in military capabilities also sends a dangerous signal to the aggressor. Weakness invites them in. President Trump is right to say that we don't spend enough. It's time to invest. We all need to be realistic about Russia. Russia poses existential threat to our security today, tomorrow, and for as long as we underinvest in our defense. Time is not on Russia's side, but it's not necessarily on our side either, because we are not yet doing enough. Second, there should be no doubt in any of our minds that we need to spend more to prevent war. But we also need to prepare for war.
That was actually, I'm wrong. That was not at Davos. That was at an event, the New Horizons in EU Defense, and that was the foreign minister for the European Union saying that they need to prepare for war in Europe and they need to invest in the military because Russia is prepared for war with them, and the only way to stop the war is to invest. It has long been axiomatic in American foreign policy and military policy that the best way to stop a war is to build up your military as well you can. We have a problem in this country. Ronald Reagan knew that he could bankrupt the Soviet Union. Reagan was willing to bring our national debt over $1 trillion for the first time because Reagan knew that we could outspend the Soviet Union. We could force them into bankruptcy, and it worked. We were spending a quarter to a third of our GDP on defense. Do you know what it is now? It's less than 10%. The bulk of our domestic spending does not go to defense anymore. It goes to other things. Meanwhile, China and Russia, most of their budget goes to defense. Here's a story from the Wall Street Journal today you all need to pay attention to. One day after Donald Trump pledged at his inauguration to be a peacemaker and unifier, the United States' two most powerful adversaries agreed to work more closely on overhauling a world order they see as orbiting around the West. In a video call on Tuesday, Russian President Vladimir Putin and Chinese leader Xi Jinping promised to work hand in hand in what could prove to be the first indication of a new phase in their deepening confrontation with Washington. Neither side mentioned the U.S. president in statements released after the call. But with global attention focused on Trump's return to office and the flurry of executive orders he has signed, Beijing and Moscow made clear they're reading from the same page whatever is happening in Washington. The Kremlin ensured nobody missed the point. In an unusual move, it published footage from the conversation on its website showing Putin and Xi exchanging cordial greetings, calling each other dear friend, and issuing brief statements about their growing ties in a short clip from a call that Russia said lasted more than 90 minutes. Both sides should continue to deepen strategic coordination, firmly support one another, and safeguard both countries' legitimate interests, Xi said on the call, according to a readout by the Chinese side. Putin said there was an, quote, alignment of views on how relations between great powers should be. Yuri Yusakov, a senior advisor to Putin, said the two leaders talked about the need for a peace deal in Ukraine and discussed the situation in the Middle East, according to Russian state media. Putin stressed Russia's support for China over the question of Taiwan, Yusakov said. He said the call was planned in advance and had no ties to Trump's inauguration. Right. Do you believe that, really? I have friends who have scoffed at the idea that there is a growing axis of evil. They say, oh, put George Bush in the past, put that in the past. That reminds me of when Democrats laughed at Mitt Romney in 2012 for saying Russia was our biggest geopolitical threat, and Barack Obama mocked him. The 80s call, they want their foreign policy back. I think Republicans who scoff at the idea of this axis of evil are just as arrogant and rotted in the brain as Democrats were with Obama and Russia being a threat. There is an isolationist sentiment among a core group of MAGA supporters these days. And if they abdicate our role in the world, it's going to be very expensive to get it back when we realize having Russia and China in charge is bad for us. Listen, the thing that frustrates me is I actually think that I understand the isolationists better than the isolationists understand my viewpoint. Because they go hysterical about perpetual war and the military-industrial complex stuff. That's not it at all. I understand you think that there are a lot of problems in the world. The United States is spread too thin. We have too many problems at home. We have a national debt that needs solving, and we can't be all things to all people. We need to be all things to Americans first, to which we can. I totally get that sentiment. I don't want forever wars. And I love the idea of an American empire, but I'm not there to expand an American empire. And in your caricature of things so that you don't actually have to grapple with the seriousness of the issue. And I think that's actually what's going on. I think the people who scream about American isolationism and American empire and stuff like that, they're not super serious, and they throw these things up because they don't want to have to grapple with the point. And the point is this: we are the leader of the free world, and you all know it. Every single one of you, including the isolationists, know it. And if we give up the leadership of the free world, it's going to start crumbling, and Russia and China and their allies, North Korea, Venezuela, Iran, are going to rise. And you think that's no big deal for us. You are a stupid person if you think it's no big deal for us. You are an illiterate, mind-numbed muppet of bad interests if you actually believe that. Why? Because if we abdicate our leadership in the world, you know what's going to happen? Our interest rates are going to go up for trading. Our costs of trade are going to go up. You complain about the cost of groceries right now. You just wait until China's in charge of the world and we stop getting the most favorable trade rates in the world. Right now, an American with an American passport can go anywhere in the world pretty cheaply. We give up our leadership role in the world, that all goes away. The cost of traveling go up, and you're like, well, I'm never going to leave the country. That's fine, you self-interested snob. Many Americans actually like to travel the world. They like to take their family on vacation, and they can go knowing they're an American. And because they're an American in most of the world, they're going to get preferential trade rates, preferential currency exchange rates. All that goes away when China's in charge. And by the way, you who like to get on the internet and mouth off and say whatever you want to say, and you're so glad that Donald Trump is now in charge because you get your First Amendment right. When China and Russia reign supreme, all that goes away. You think, in theory, you'll have your constitutional First Amendment right. In practice, no, you won't, because Russia and China will be controlling what you can say on the internet. Oh, you think it's my country, I can say whatever I want in my country. No, not really, because you may live in your country, but the social media engine on which you're on is a global company, and they will begin so slowly, softly restricting what you can say and get seen. The shadow bans will reign supreme. It is willfully naive to think the United States should get off the stage and let Russia and China reign supreme, because you know what's going to happen? If we don't lead, they're the only ones who can. The European Union can't lead. The European Union is in the middle of a crack-up over Germany, over the UK, even France and Italy aren't big proponents of it anymore. Many of the Eastern European countries that joined the European Union are starting to think this isn't good. This is just like the Soviet system. None of those countries individually can lead. Isolationism, every time the United States has gone down that road, we've gotten World War. And the cost of us rising again will be too great. It is better to feed the inertia that keeps us in charge than to apply pressure to slow us down and get off the world stage, because we may be blocked out permanently from getting back in leadership. And by then, the cost, you'll see the cost. You'll say, I made a mistake. But it'll be too costly to undo the damage. Donald Trump has got to lead the world. And by the way, it's remarkable. I mean, you heard the EU foreign minister noting Donald Trump is right, that we're not spending enough on our military. Yeah. His leadership doesn't mean we have to carry all the costs. I mean, take Ukraine, for example. I would far prefer it if Ukrainian kids die to fight Russia than American kids die to fight Russia. You may not like funding Ukraine, but when Russia starts spreading with China around the world, we're going to ultimately have to confront them unless we can confront them with Ukrainian kids instead of our kids. That doesn't mean that Biden handled it well. In fact, we do need to resupply. We've got to build up our arms. We need to figure out a way to rebuild our military supply chain domestically. We need to divest from China. We need to put more with our allies instead of relying on China. There are things we have to do, but none of those things mean we have to give up our leadership of the free world. If we give up our leadership of the free world, there will be no free world, because we are the only country capable of leading a world to be free. China wants to lead the world. The Chinese are communists. Communists are bad, and we can't let them. hang on. Let me start with this. This is that goofy guy on MSNBC, Eli Mistel, whatever. Just listen to this quote.
Court gave him multiple shots at getting the Muslim ban across the finish line, right? The first time it was ruled unconstitutional. He came back again. And so as we talk about the rest of these orders, remember that even though I can say, oh, that's clearly unconstitutional, that's clearly not going to happen, this court, stacked as it is with Trump justices, will give Trump an opportunity to try them again and again and again until he gets them right. So that's what the Muslim ban is, a perfect example of what we're signing up for during these first days of our reign of terror. Yeah. He's going to have multiple opportunities to get some of these bans through.
The reign of terror. Tom Homan is the ICE chief now for Donald Trump.
No, it started. ICE teams are out there as of today. We gave them the direction to prioritize public safety threats that we're looking for. So we've been working up the target list. There was some discussion about Chicago because the specific operational plan was released. So we had to look at and reevaluate, does this raise officer safety concerns? And it does. Mm-hmm. But we've addressed that, and teams are out there effective today.
That's one. Teams are out there in multiple American cities. Here's one more from Tom Homan.
What would a person have to do to get a visit from ICE?
For it to be in the country illegally, first of all, I mean, there's nothing in the immigration law that says you got to be convicted of a serious crime to be removed under the INA. So if you're in the country illegally, ICE can visit you.
Good. Now, I mentioned yesterday that Donald Trump has designated the Mexican drug cartels foreign terrorist operations, and it's a good thing. By designating them foreign terrorist organizations, it makes it easier to evict their members from the United States. There's less of a bureaucratic hassle to get them out of here. It's easier to seize assets from the drug cartels. Maria Habib and Simon Romero at the New York Times reporting from Mexico City. This is the New York Times spin on what Donald Trump has done. Listen to this. President Trump's executive order designating Mexican cartels and other criminal organizations as foreign terrorists could force some American companies to forego doing business in Mexico rather than risk U.S. sanctions, according to former government officials and analysts, an outcome that could have a major effect on both countries given their deep economic interdependence. The executive order, which Mr. Trump signed on Monday, is intended to apply maximum pressure on Mexico to rein in its dangerous drug trade. The designation more generally also gives his administration more power to impose economic penalties and travel restrictions and potentially even to take military action in foreign countries. Yet, disentangling cartel operations from U.S. interests in Mexico could be immensely complicated. Mexico is the United States' largest trading partner of goods, and many American companies have manufacturing operations there. Even more complicated, these criminal networks have extended their operations far beyond drug trafficking and human smuggling. They are now embedded in a wide swath of the legal economy, from avocado farming to the country's billion-dollar tourism industry, making it hard to be absolutely sure that American companies are isolated from cartel activity. This has come up in previous administrations across the political spectrum and from members of Congress who have wanted to do it, says Samantha Soltoon, a senior advisor on sanctions policy and threat finance in the Trump and Biden administrations. No one has done it because they have looked at what the implications would be on trade, economic, and financial relationships between Mexico and the United States, she added. They have all come away thinking that such a designation would actually be super short-sighted and ill-considered, though prior administrations viewed the U.S.-Mexico relationship far differently than the incoming Trump administration appears to. The foreign terrorist designation could lead to severe penalties, including substantial fines, asset seizures, and criminal charges on companies and individuals found to be paying ransom or extortion payments. U.S. companies could also be ensnared by standard payments made to Mexican companies that a cartel controls without the American company's knowledge. Such extortion payments, even if made under duress, could be considered material support to cartels. Guys, I got to admit, I'm reading this whole thing, and the whole way through, I'm like, So? Former U.S. officials and analysts pointed out that it would be nearly impossible to identify which business may employ or be affiliated with cartel members, given the tens of thousands of people involved and operating in various industries, including the hotel and agriculture sectors. Cartels use the legal economy to launder money, which could mean the unwitting employees working at a resort or an avocado packing company could technically be on cartel payroll and not know it. So what they're saying is what I've been telling you, but they don't want to actually acknowledge it in writing, though they're hinting at it, that Mexico is a failed narco-terrorist state. The New York Times, in its reporting on why designating drug cartels foreign terrorist organizations, says that it's dangerous to do this because so many legal businesses in Mexico are actually controlled by the drug cartels. You could actually be crippling our economy for doing business with lawful businesses in Mexico that are in the pocket of the drug cartels. That is an admission against interest that Mexico is a failed narco-terrorist state. And being a failed narco-terrorist state on our border means Donald Trump should be taking this action. It's like when Democrats talk about illegal immigration, they say, well, we need someone to take care of grandmother at the nursing home for cheap. We need someone to pick the crops for cheap. They're essentially acknowledging that they want a serf class of illegal aliens in this country doing jobs Americans don't want to do for cheap. It's not that Americans won't do the jobs. It's that Americans won't do the jobs for cheap. So our prices would go up. And look, there is a legitimate issue here with illegal aliens doing work. I personally think that we should renew immigration programs we had before Lyndon Johnson killed them that allowed migrant workers to come into this country for 6 months, do the jobs Americans didn't want to do for cheap, do those jobs, and then go home for 6 months and rotate people in and out every 6 months. Allow them to do it because there are jobs Americans aren't going to do as cheaply as we need it to be done to save costs. And you don't want your costs to go up. It's already too expensive right now with groceries. But we don't necessarily need illegal immigrants here. And I look at these Democratic objections and say, you're essentially saying that we have to break the law in this country as opposed to why don't we fix the law? Democrats don't want to fix the immigration law because they're in the pocket of the unions, and the unions would rather turn a blind eye to illegal immigration than allow a class of worker to come in the country and work for cheaper than union wage rates. So we're in the illegal immigration mess we're in right now in large part because of major labor unions in this country, and that's a fact. But this kind of sickens me here with this reporting from the New York Times that because the Mexican economy is so intertwined with the drug cartels, we shouldn't be treating the drug cartels as terrorist organizations. That other U.S. presidents, Republican and Democrat alike, thought about doing this and decided, oh, we can't. We can't because we could be hurting lawful businesses in Mexico. No, I think we should be doing this. Banks may turn away customers because they may not think they are worth the risk if they have links to Mexico, says Erick Jacobstein, a former State Department official in the Biden administration. Banks could ultimately decide to avoid entire sectors perceived as high risk, says Fabian Teachman, a Swiss lawyer and expert on terrorist financing. Mr. Teachman singled out Mexico's avocado trade, where cartels have drastically expanded their operations, as one area that could come under greater scrutiny. Banks might say, we don't want to be anywhere close to those who are considered to be terrorists, so we want to avoid that risk, Mr. Teachman said. From a banking perspective, that'll be a reasonable decision. Other types of financial institutions that facilitate payments between the U.S. and Mexico could be affected, such as Venmo or PayPal. The terrorist label could also push big parts of Mexico's economy further into the shadows, where cash is used instead of electronically traceable transactions, making it harder for investigators to examine the cartel's financial structure. Y'all, I'm sorry, I don't have a problem with this. I just simply do not have a problem with this. This is going to hurt American companies because the companies are doing business with the drug cartels. I think if an American company is doing business with a drug cartel, that American company, I'm fine with it being hurt. Think of the millions of American citizens who are dying at the hands of the drug cartels. And the New York Times wants us to be upset. Well, this could complicate things for an American business doing business in Mexico. We have to think about the businesses working with the drug cartels, not the people dying from the drugs. And this gets me full circle to what I was talking about at the beginning of the show, is that with these policies that Donald Trump is announcing, they're not actually taking the focus of look at the people who might benefit from these policies, look at the Americans who might be saved from the policies. Let's find the victims. Let's find the victims of these policies and highlight how bad the Trump administration policy is from the perspective of the victims. And who are the victims of a foreign designated terrorism for cartels? It's the American businesses doing business with the drug cartels. We're supposed to feel sorry for them. This is one more paragraph from this New York Times piece. The terrorist designation could also hurt American companies that are firmly north of the border but rely on Mexican labor. The designation is so broad and vague that ranches in Texas or farms in California could be swept up by the penalties if their employees send remittances to family members in Mexico who are involved in organized crime. If money transfer companies like Western Union also stop transactions to Mexico over worries about properly vetting Mexican clients, it could affect the remittances the country relies on. That would be devastating to the Mexican economy, which receives $63.6 billion in remittances in 2023, nearly 5% of the country's gross domestic product. The foreign terrorist designation could also pave the way for the United States to deploy forces inside Mexico against criminal organizations without the Mexican government's consent. Oh, poor little Mexico. Oh, poor little Mexican economy. Oh. You're a narco-terrorist state. Mexico is not a legitimate country anymore. It's got borders, but the government is in the pocket of the drug cartels. The entire country is in the pocket of the drug cartels. And this might make it more difficult for the drug cartels. Oh, poor little Mexico. They had plenty of opportunities to clean up their act, and they chose to be more and more embedded into corruption with the Mexican drug cartels. I'm sorry. I don't feel sorry for any of these businesses. I don't feel sorry for any of these people who might not be able to illegally come into this country and send money home through Western Union because they might be going to fund their relatives who participate in drug cartel activity. I have no sympathy for these people. And this is the fact that the American media, the New York Times, would do a story that is trying to make sympathetic the drug cartels because Donald Trump designated them terrorist organizations. This is everything wrong with the media encapsulated in one story. Yes. Will it cause more harm? Will it force businesses to clean up their act? Will it drive up costs for businesses? Will it make it harder to do business in Mexico? Absolutely. Absolutely. But that's the point. Mexico has chosen not to clean itself up. Mexico has chosen to get into the pockets of the drug cartels. The Mexican government is on loan from the drug cartels. The fact that this pressure could be brought to bear economically on Mexico, good. It was a good thing that Donald Trump did this. And the fact that the New York Times is upset about it shows you just how good it is. Only the New York Times would write a story trying to show the fallout from a Trump executive order and say, essentially, poor drug cartels. We must think about them and those who work for them. Good Lord.